In this video, let's talk about the bosses of Metal Slug Tactics and how to beat them. We're only going to talk about the main 3 bosses you'll encounter. There are some other secret bosses, and of course the ending boss we might do it another time. But for now, we're going to talk about the ones in the jungle, the tombs, and the desert. So just going in order here, we have the Big She, the battleship. In my opinion, the hardest of the basic 3 bosses. Ironically, the first one you have to face when you first start the game. This one is going to decimate you the first time. Now, important note for all the bosses, they all follow a pattern, and once you get that pattern down, they are much easier, so you do intend to lose the first time against the bosses while you're learning their pattern, but after that, it is much easier. What makes this boss so hard is that he cannot be hit by melee, so if you have multiple melee characters like I usually run, it means you can do much less damage to him. In addition, he has a lot of little barriers to prevent ranged characters from hitting him unless you're using like grenades that you throw in an arc. What this means overall is he is very difficult to hit very often, so you have to do this in a very particular way. And to make it worse, his main mechanic, as you can see on the screen there are little skulls floating above the platform. Every few turns, he sinks a platform, and that instant KOs anyone on said platform, which means you need to constantly be moving. So it's very hard to position your characters in such a way that you have a clear open shot to the enemy, as well as you're moving enough to get away from the falling down platforms, as well as avoiding the big artillery shots that do a lot of damage where you have to be behind cover for it. So, my tips for beating this boss. Number 1, if at all possible, I know on your first game you have to fight this boss first, but once you're past that first game, this is the boss I always fight last. Being higher level and more importantly having more abilities to deal with it means that I have a few more options for dealing damage and moving around the map, and that makes it a little bit easier to get into position when you're dealing with the frustrations of, oh, I can't shoot him because there's a pillar in the way, or he's too far away from my main damage dealer to melee, or whatever it may be. So be higher level, do this boss last. Tip number 2 is you don't have to take out every single unit. As long as you can outrun them, they will fall down on the platforms when they break the platforms, so keep moving and keep moving far. The only time you really need to take them out, 1, is if they're a grenadier in your path because they deal so much damage, or 2, if they're in this situation, they're going to block your path, which means you can't move past them, which is always a terrible thing because you need to keep moving forward so you don't get trapped and fall down the platform. So be smart about who you're taking out. Make sure you're only taking out people who are going to block your path or people that are going to do huge damage, but don't take out every single person. Tip number 3, remember that there is no time limit, or at least as far as I've seen. I've run round and round and round this ship multiple times and never ran out of time. As long as you're still alive, as long as you still have health, you can keep playing. So even if you're only taking little pot shots here and there, doing a little bit of damage, you're still making progress. If you make a turn where you only deal 3 damage to it, but you've taken no damage yourself, you've made progress. Keep running that circle. That is the most important thing, is to stay ahead of the falling down platforms and just keep chipping away at its HP. Tip number 4, remember that special abilities can hit the boss as well, depending on what the special ability is, so don't be afraid to use some of those adrenaline abilities to get a little bit of extra damage in. I did that a lot with this character, since Ares' grenade barrage allows me to hit it multiple times with the same grenade, which is wonderful for taking out the enemy and getting some of that range damage on the ship. I wouldn't recommend, you can see in my assets I have a Slugnoid. I wouldn't recommend using the vehicles simply because most of the vehicles don't have enough movement to keep up with the falling platforms. I've never really used them on this fight, but some assets are super helpful. The bonus movement one, of course, is excellent, and the ability to full heal your team is excellent, but the most important one is if you can get the tactical strike, because that deals a ton of damage and it can be used at a range, which means you can do 10 damage from anywhere, which is excellent for finishing off the boss. So if you can get your hands on one of those, it never hurts to have in your pocket. My final big tip you can see me doing here, when you're getting barraged by the big blast that does area damage, make sure you put it to use. Run it to as many enemies as you can to take them out at the same time. As you can see, the platform in front of us only has 3 turns left, so I need to get going to get onto that one and move to the next area. And there's a bunch of people blocking the way, so by putting these people in the right position, I am able to take a lot of them down very quickly, so don't be afraid to use their own weapons against them. Now let's talk the Desert Snake. This one's not too bad. His whole shtick is that he will, every third turn, he will have this huge wave clearing ability that instantly takes out everything on the map unless you're standing against one of those giant metal girders you can see on the ground there. What makes this difficult is that means you have one turn to move up, one turn to do damage, but you have to make sure that on that third turn, if you've done damage, you have a way to retreat and get to safety. Here you can see if I was a melee character and got all the way up in his face, there's only one spot for my character to be able to move to safely, and that is near where Tarma is at now. But if I wasn't careful or smart about it, then he would get taken out in the end. So you have to be really careful in that third turn when that big blast comes. You need to make sure you're in a position to be able to run away safely. Tip number 2 is actually going to be kind of a strange one, but don't be afraid to turn into a mummy. The mummy does huge damage, and most importantly with his huge damage, it can be done at a range if you use the throw head ability. So if you strategically turn into a mummy, especially on characters that are like melee, you now have a very powerful ranged attack. And if like all 3 of your team happens to be mummies at once, that's 30 damage you can deal very easily from across the map. So don't be afraid to turn into a mummy. It is very powerful, but it does limit your movement, so be careful again when it's happening to make sure you don't get caught out in the open. Outside of his wave clear, he doesn't have a whole lot of dangerous attacks. He has like a little melee attack in front of him, so don't just stand in front of him. He also occasionally can fire the guns out of his head. That doesn't deal a whole lot of damage, so as long as you've got a little bit of movement, you really don't have to fear that. And if you have someone like Theo on your team who has teleportation or nudge, this boss becomes trivial because you're able just to move those people and break those rules to the safety on that third wave attack. Another thing to be careful on this boss, after he fires his laser, he will reposition and it will shift the map. And one of the scary things he can do when he shifts the map is he can add little tombs to it, which means if you stand in the wrong place, it will spawn more enemies. You don't want to deal with that because you don't want to spawn more enemies, because again, they will block your path and you need to be able to get behind those metal girders every third round. But once you get into the groove with it, like I said with the battleship boss, once you know exactly what they're going to do round 1, round 2, round 3, it makes it a lot easier to plan, to get into position, and to deal damage like you need to get in and get out. And just like the battleship, as far as I know, there is no time limit. As long as you're doing a little bit of damage, not taking too much damage yourself, you're going to be making progress. I usually do this boss second simply because the boss in the jungle is just so easy that this one, at least having a couple extra levels, a couple extra abilities, makes it an easier time. As you can see here, I used that mummy like I said to. Using that long range attack gave me a huge bit of damage against him and allows me to then move over to the girder. Remember that when you're a mummy for one turn, you can't be turned into a mummy again, and the next turn you will turn back to normal, which gives you your full movement back, so do take advantage of that as well. And just like the first boss, my last tip is don't worry about all the guys because they instantly die on the third round no matter what. Only take out the ones that are either going to body block you so you can't get to where you're going, or the ones that are going to present an actual true danger to you. The ones that can do mummy blasts that do 5+ damage or grenades that do 5+ damage. The ones that only do 2 or 3 damage can usually be pretty safely ignored so that you can deal that damage against the enemies. Finally, let's talk about the spider boss, the dragoon. This thing is the easiest boss, so I always recommend going against this one first, because you simply don't need a whole lot to go against it. Like the previous boss, every third turn he instantly destroys the entire map and all the enemies on it. You just have to stand in the right position to not get hit by it, which means you don't have to worry about clearing out too many enemies because he will instantly take them out. In addition, he has this chain gun you can see here that does a lot of damage to their own allies, as well as a map blast where you have to hide behind the fortifications to avoid getting taken out. The key to taking this boss out is reading his telegraphs. Here you can see he's going to use his miniguns, and you can see where he is going to move based on that. You can see he's going to be moving to the left. He's going to shoot at Tarma and move to that corner up there. So I don't want to move to where he's at now. I want to get my people into position to be able to hit him next turn where he's going to be. Every one of his moves should telegraph either where he's going to move to, or he's going to move one space over. And that means that you're going to want to move into position to deal those damage where he's going to be, not where he's at. Don't play catch up the entire time, get ahead of him. Now, when I made my first video, I talked about being lucky enough to not encounter bugs, and now that I've played a lot more, this boss seems to be the buggiest. Hopefully in the future this will not be an issue, but it does seem like at least once a fight he becomes invulnerable and I can't hit him. That is because there is a visual glitch and he is not moving to where the game thinks he's supposed to be. When that happens, you have to exit out and come back in. Like I said, that has been happening to me like once a fight now, so do be careful of that. It is really annoying, but it is manageable with a quick log in, log out. As you saw me just use, don't be afraid to use the springs. The springs allow you to move very quickly across the map, and there's usually one or two of these on the map, which allows you to jump over enemies and avoid them. As I said, you don't want to spend too much time fighting enemies when you could be fighting the boss and dealing damage against the boss, especially since a lot of times the enemies won't be able to catch up to you, especially if you have any sort of actions or special abilities. The only annoyance you'll run into is you see to the right of my character's right in front of the boss there does seem to be some wood in front of him, and that will block your shots. Like the battleship, there are a few things that prevent you from being able to make a ranged attack against him. However, it only spawns one or two of those, so they are pretty easily avoided, so it is not much of an obstacle. So here you can see that I positioned my characters so that they would be in the right place to hit the boss where he is going to be. Now he is shooting little homing missiles that aren't going to hit anyone, which gives me the ability to deal a lot of damage. Since most of the enemies aren't going to be able to get up to me anyways, I can deal some damage this turn and then move next turn to get to where he is going to be going next, which is going to be going to the far right. But we have a springboard to help with that. Another quick note for this boss, something you see on the character in the bottom middle of the screen with that little mark on his head. Those enemies, if you deal damage to them but don't take them out, they go into like a berserk state and deal extra damage. So make sure if you're going to hurt those guys or you need to take them out, you take them out completely. Otherwise, they get more deadly if you leave them alive slightly wounded. You do have to be aware of that. So here you can see, as we said, he fired his shot and he moved to the right, which means now we can move over to the right, and now we're on the pouncing section where he is going to jump on the map and is going to destroy everything and reset. I can either try and hit him, but the most important part is I move somewhere where he cannot hit me, and typically if you move farther you can get that extra adrenaline, and that matters too. He is in a position where I won't be able to hit him with my melee character, but with an easy shotgun ability there, we can hit him with all three and deal a lot of damage. So don't forget how you do your sync attacks. If your character is melee, they should have some sort of ranged ability as a special weapon, and if you instigate them with the special weapon, they can use it in a sync attack and deal a lot of damage. So here he goes, he's going to jump on the map, destroy it, you're going to fall through, the map resets, new enemies come in. And now the fight proceeds just like normal. You want to go to where he is going to go, you want to only take out enemies that are going to block you, and you want to destroy him. In this case, I can see, okay, he's only got 17 health left. I believe I can take him out this turn. So rather than worrying about where he's going to be next turn, I just pile on and destroy him. As I said, this guy is the easiest boss to fight, so always take him on first. All you have to be aware of is that third turn wave clear. Outside of that, the enemies typically don't do a whole lot, and you're just moving around a lot, so you don't need a lot of abilities. And there you have it. Those are the three bosses. Again, the biggest tip is just learn how they act, learn the interactions with them, how their patterns are, and they become much, much easier. Again, I always go with the Spider-Man first, and then the desert dude, and then finally the battleship, because I do find him to be the hardest. If you enjoyed this and my other videos, please tell me down below. And if you want that final boss guide, please tell me as well. I'm always excited to do this, and it's always more exciting when people actually want that. So I love to hear that. Thank you, and have a blessed day.